Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff One Never Told You, a production by iHeartRadio. And today we are once again so happy to be joined by the wonderful, the outstanding Bridget Todd. Welcome, Bridget.
Thank you for having me. So excited to be back. Before we started recording, we were reminiscing about our local malls, and now I have like mall madness. It's like nostalgia overload.
Yes.
Look, Anney bought me that game because it was one of my childhood games, Mall Madness. And we talked about we have to play this game. I realized I do not remember how to play. When we opened it, I was like, wait, what? We have to buy things. I know that. But how do you buy things? And sometimes you can use cash and sometimes you get declined. I don't remember. Bridget, you should come down and we'll have a game night.
Yes, I'll bring Dream Phone. That was my game.
So you have Dream Phone. I have Blind Date because I got Anney purchased that. We need to do that. The mall. Okay, come down. I have a Sweet Valley High game and a Babysitter's game. Come on. We're going to have a whole
I'm in.
time.
This is very much
Slumber
an evening of my dreams.
Listen, I just have to brag, Bridget. I won our dating game twice.
We played a Blind Date together, and I was like, I don't know what's happening, but she ended up winning.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a game of strategy or like skill or sort of like luck?
Wait, Samantha.
No.
I think there's some strategy.
None
I realized
whatsoever.
that this guy didn't like football, so maybe he would be into this character. I think they should update it so you can have queer characters. That's my...
Yeah.
I bet they have an update. Have we? I don't know if we logged with that. We talked about all of the old games that were very gendered and the ones that we remembered. But like yes, things like Mall Madness really popped up. My brother actually really enjoyed that game too, but he wouldn't admit it. But every time he see me pull it out and I would play by myself, yes, I was that kid, he would ask to join me sometimes.
There's something to be said about the games that were coming out at that time that had like the very specific technology that could be used for nothing else.
Yeah,
like Dream Phone. I'm going far back into the recesses of my memory here, so might not be totally right, but it came with like a clunky plastic phone that you would put to your ear, and it would be like, he's not wearing a hat, and you had to figure out like who had a crush on you based on like what this phone would tell you. I think.
So the brand Girl Talk, who did that, the date one, as well as Truth or Dare, like that was their brand. They also had like magazines, I believe. But yeah, they made sure to capitalize on only their games. Oh man, memories.
A real like gendered media empire.
It was. But so that is that conversation we've had repeatedly, like all the industries that if they specifically go after women most of the times or young girls, they know it's a moneymaker. We talked about that as like with games, and we actually talked about that with magazines too.
Yes.
So that's actually a perfect segue into what I want to talk about. And by the way, like I didn't even connect this, but I was a voracious reader of magazines, like any kind of girl magazine in the 90s I was getting. I got all of them. I also loved a good catalog. I still have Delia's catalogs that I thumb through. Like it was a real like time to be a girl who liked to consume media. And something that I find really interesting is the way that today those same like media spaces can really be used to expose women to ideology that you might not even like on the face really recognize. We talked a little bit about this in the episode that you and I all did about Candace Owen, how she is so good at using like apolitical conversations about celebrity to really radicalize women. And in that same vein, we have to talk about this magazine called Evie magazine. I think have you all what's your familiarity with Evie?
Right. So when I saw this was coming to our conversations, at first I was like, wait, why does this look familiar? And then I realized in our 10 to 20 part episode of religious trauma and women that we actually used some of their publication. And it was one of those that as I was like, because I was not familiar when I first pulled up into this article, and because we were talking about, purity culture and sexuality and women and all of these things within Christianity, especially Western Christianity. And it was this whole like bit, it was twisting the narrative a little bit about like, people being too sexualized has really, really gone away from us and made it so over the top that it's no longer enjoyable or da da da. And at first you're like, yeah, this could make sense. And then as I read more and more, I'm like, wait, who is this publication? And it's Evie. And I went through it. I was like, wow, they really have dug deep in this whole like relevance culture within Christianity to bring out something that doesn't feel like it's preaching at you, but it has an agenda. And I was like, wow. So we were familiar because in that same, like, of course, we wanted to talk about that conversation. So I had to give a caveat to our listeners to be like, hey, so this publication is specifically very Christian oriented and is published by very conservative people. And you don't know that until much later into reading things in here. So that's how I was like, okay, so we used them before. They're an interesting publication.
Yeah, and what you just described is really part and parcel of the experience of reading Evie online. You might be like, oh, well, this is a reasonable take. Like, oh, I agree with that. And then you're like, wait a minute, this is actually, I'm not so sure. Let's take a look at like who's behind this publication and what they're about. So this whole conversation comes off the heels of a really meaty profile with the founder of Evie magazine in the New York Times. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about comes from that piece by Katie J.M. Baker. If you've not seen Evie is a women's media outlet. If you have seen their content on the internet, you probably think of it as a publication that focuses on pop culture, wellness, and relationships for a female audience. But it has a distinct conservative perspective that, Samantha, as you rightly clocked, might not be so obvious at first glance. And this is a problem. I'll get sort of more into why, I'm sure, in this conversation.
Yes. And this was something Samantha and I were just discussing about how there's all these like back doors into getting radicalized, like content that you think, oh, this is yoga content. And then it's got this other thing. It's like lures you in. So it's important to look into, okay, what is the agenda? Who is behind it? So can you tell us, Bridget, a little bit more about those things?
Yes. So Evie was founded by a husband-wife duo, 33-year-old Brittany Hugo Boom with her husband Gabriel. They describe it as a kind of anti-Cosmo magazine. They said they want to be the one-stop shop for femininity. That's from Brittany Hugo Boom, who is the public face of the business. The story of how Evie came to be in the world is a kind of a familiar one for anybody who has ever started a magazine or wanted to, publish something. Brittany said that she was a model for brands like Adidas, and during that time, she loved fashion and she loved pop culture magazines like Elle. This was in the 2010s, and that was, as somebody who was a voracious reader of women's media, like, it was just a particular time for women's media, especially online. You had sites like Jezebel and The Cut that were these explicitly feminist spaces that also did a lot of coverage on like pop culture, women's health, and politics. So like the women's media ecosystem at that time really did a good job of blending feminism with pop culture and politics. But Brittany really felt overlooked by this kind of coverage. She said that she had a hard time finding positive coverage in this media climate about things like traditional marriage and motherhood. I will pause there and say, like, I don't want to discount Brittany's experience. I feel like in the 2010s, I read a lot of content about motherhood and marriage. Like, I don't know if we were coming up in the same media ecosystem. I will just say, like, my personal experience is that I do think there's a lot of coverage about marriage out there. I don't think that that's like a third rail topic that is not being discussed in the culture, but that's what Brittany says anyway. So thus, the idea for Evie magazine was born. A stylish publication rooted in celebrating, quote, femininity. This is from the New York Times. Quote, it would be as escapist and aspirational as any other mainstream women's magazine, except Evie covers girls who would not be politicians in power suits, but the type of women who might compete in beauty pageants 2 weeks after giving birth to their 8th child, which their most recent cover girl, Utah influencer Hannah Nealman, aka Ballerina Farm, actually did. The magazine's name is a riff on the first woman in the Bible, Quote, Eve screwed the world, Hugo Boom said, and this is a new Eve who will save the world. So if you're clocking some, like, pretty deep religious vibes on that one, you would be right.
I'm not okay. So I figured out finally where we used it, and it was actually for our Women in Magazine. We were talking about that earlier about how I'd mentioned like gendered things such as women's magazines really made a lot of money. And realizing after they started like the Housewife magazine, they jumped into young girl magazines and teaching them how to be wives and partners and such. But Evie magazine was in that conversation because they talk about the whole level of like, have we over-sexualized girls so much that we are causing young girls to have complexes in not being sexual enough? Like all of these things, which was like, sometimes we do need that conversation about having balance in this. And then again, like I said, I was like, wait, this sounds like a great idea. And then you start looking at the ads and then you start reading more into it. And the ads were like, return to femininity. And I was like, okay. Which just sounds like the whole level of like, we're going to correct the evils of women by making you real feminine. But when we say feminine, we mean submissive. But it is something that we have to credit them that they understand what makes money.
Oh, yeah. When I read that New York Times profile, I was really struck by how savvy they were, how media savvy they were, how smart they were. Like, in terms of business decisions, they're right on the money. I don't happen to like or agree with the ideology they push, but in terms of, like, do they have the potential to make a lot of money? I think the answer is yes. And Sam, you really clock something that it's even difficult to really parse. But I think that one of the reasons why they found some success is that they do speak to issues that are like they kind of have a point in some ways, right? Like, it is a totally valid conversation to say like, oh, well, in a climate where women are told that it's good to be sex positive and like it's good to like, embrace your sexuality, which is all great. What does that do to like younger women and girls? Is it impacting them in a negative way? These are great questions to ask, and I'm happy that people are asking them. And like the kind of work that you all do here on Sminty is a great example of that. But the way that Evie takes this like reasonable conversation and then like completely goes to the extreme with it. And that's why you should really be getting involved in like purity culture. And that's why your real value as a woman is about like, who you give yourself to. Like it almost kind of swings back around to this incredibly rigid understanding of women and girls. And so the way that they're able to really occupy that space of like, well, this is a reasonable question, but then take it so far afield that you're like, well, that is not a reasonable conclusion.
I think it's savvy that they did hone in on, hey, I know. We can be like, feminism is bad and here's why. Like, they also did that where they're like, okay, by being feminist, what you're saying is you're anti-woman. Mm-hmm. Which then it's just like a whole mind, honestly.
Yeah, some of the positions that are advocated for in Evie are just like very extreme when it comes to women and girls, right? Like, things like women shouldn't, it's not good for women to be working, things like that, things that are like, anybody would look at that and be like, well, that is a very extreme perspective. This is what this like glossy, poppy magazine is advocating for, right? And it's just like a very, very conservative and traditional perspective on gender to the point of being, in my opinion, extreme. Here's a little bit from the piece. They say, Evie sees themselves as in opposition to what they've called modern feminism. Femininity does not mean feminism, which Hugo Boom doesn't define as equal rights, but as a self-hating movement that is anti-family and anti-male, one that shames women who choose conventional roles. Despite running two companies, she is particularly critical of what she calls girl boss feminism. her interpretation of that term, which went from broadly celebrated to roundly dismissed in the 2010s, is that it encourages women to be just like men to succeed in corporate fields. Such messaging, she says, has made women anxious, lonely, and unfulfilled. Instead, she believes faith, family, and love, not casual sex, careerism, or ideological activism, supply the greatest satisfaction. So exactly what you just said, Anney, like, it's these attitudes that say that they are meant to celebrate women, but then what they're actually, the actual conclusion is incredibly anti-woman, right? Like, and notice how they put that, you know, ideological activism. No, that's not going to make women happy. Like, oh, okay, so I shouldn't advocate for things I believe in. Got it.
I mean, you can just see how quickly this turns into anti-trans narrative. That fear of being erasing women, which is a whole kind of laughable thing because like feminism in itself is like embracing women, like being acknowledged as women, as a person, as well as trans women are women. So they're being women. So how is that erasure? Like there's so many, like this level of like almost irony, but that it works. And I don't know, because the few pieces, like I said, I read, they're very like subtle about it. They don't want to come out full force of showing that they are very, very conservative because they are trying to bring in all those leaders, kind of that same level of like when we talk about yoga and crunchy life turning into being conservative, as well as like the trad life. Because the initial idea is the aesthetic, which this magazine has that aesthetic.
Totally. And I mean, this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but I personally have to be real careful because, like, I'm someone who cares a lot about nutrition, right? Like, I am right now trying to, you know, up my physical health through nutrition and exercise. When you are like searching Instagram or TikTok for that kind of content, the way algorithms are like, oh, you like nutrition, huh? Well, how would you like some? And then it's just extremist rhetoric, extremist rhetoric, extremist rhetoric. So like, I have to be really careful because like, I do care about nutrition, and it definitely, these algorithms clock that if like that is an interest of yours, we need to be surfacing you up ever increasing extreme content. And like, next thing you know, it's like, and then certainly you're anti-vax, and then certainly you're anti-trans. And it's like, whoa, I'm just trying to, you know, get more protein in my diet and relax.
Right. I just want to like be healthy. I don't know what just happened. I don't need you to tell me that all these chemicals, which are just nutrients, are killing me. What's happening?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think they really landed on something with these pages, though, that they are able to use what we've kind of always have seen, like the magazines in general have always been about teaching girls to be better somehow, or that you're not good enough. You're not, if you want to hit these goals, this is what you need to do. And Evie's like that perfect layup for that.
Yeah. And I think that especially, you know, it doesn't surprise me that the founder of Evie really sees herself as in opposition to like the girl boss era of the 2010s that I think was really serving women like myself who were looking for something, and I think this kind of girl boss feminism filled that gap and tried to be like, well, is what you're looking for a corner office and lots of money? Because like, here's, you could have that. And this is where I have to say, like, I kind of agree with Hugo Blumen a little bit. I think that like, in the 2010s, feminism and the conversation around women and like our liberation really got co-opted by this kind of lean-in girl boss vibe where wealthy white women were really given the mic, and they used that mic to tell us that like liberation was having a corner office, kicking butt at work, having the money to pay someone else to watch your kids while you slayed in the boardroom, blah, 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 blah. And that was really empty. And I think 10 years later, I would argue that we are still reeling and feeling the fallout from how empty of a promise of liberation that ended up being. But I think nothing has really stepped in to fill that gap. And so then you have media outlets like Evie responding to this actual need in a marginalized community, a community of women, saying like, okay, well, kicking butt at work did not really lead to liberation, so what will? You know, there is a truism about extremist content that like, they are so good at identifying existing actual gaps that people need filled and then filling those gaps with their ideological content.
Right. It's so funny that when you read and see this level of cyclical actions, like we've been told so hard, it kind of is that layer of like us not looking at what society has done to us in general and telling us the only way you can succeed is you have to give 150% of yourself to this. And if you don't, your failure is on you because you didn't try hard enough, but you can't be called successful until you get these markers. And these markers are the standard by society and capitalism. So this is what it is. And if you are successful, either you're going to be penalized in one way or another, being told that you are greedy or over the top or too ambitious, or you're going to be penalized because you're going to fail in this moment and saying that you doing these things has made you obnoxious and impossible to be around. Like it's such a weird context, but it's the setup of society in that level. But at the same time, as you were saying, like grifters and those on like social media have realized, we need to come back around because people are starting to really get frustrated because they can't hit that mark and they're exhausted.
Yeah. And I completely agree with everything that you've just said. And in that climate, I can understand why a publication like Evie telling women like, listen, aren't you exhausted? Just check out of this whole thing altogether. Like, just get married, leave your job, have kids, let him work, let him figure it all out, and you just retreat from public life. Like, that is ultimately what I think that Evie is telling an entire generation of women, is that you should only exist in the domestic. And I don't want to discount the fact that there's real power in the domestic for women, like that there is power in that. No shame in that at all. But I think that what they're saying is like, women don't belong in workplaces, women don't belong in boardrooms, women don't belong in civic and public life. And that's simply not true. And so I think that Evie is setting up this alternative of like, instead of all of those things that exhaust us as women, why not embrace these soft things? Have a soft life. Like, I'm sure you've seen that kind of content all over your TikTok, right? And I think Hugo Boom says this pretty much explicitly in this piece. She says, I think more women want a soft life, a beautiful life, than feeling all this pressure to do all these things. And I can't help but really see that as in opposition to the reality that you just laid out, Sam, that like, yeah, it is hard to deal with all of these pressures to, be ambitious, but not too ambitious, make money, but not too much money, work, but then like, it's a lot. I really deeply do understand why this kind of attitude and message is very enticing, especially right now in a time of like uncertainty and chaos and rising costs and things like that.
Right. Oh, and you actually pulled out something that I was trying to look into for a Monday Mini, and I don't have enough information, but the whole, like, the soft life transitioning into red pill manosphere content and what that looks like. And I was like, oh, there it is. But we're still on the cusp of understanding it. Like, people are recognizing that as a sign. Like, this is that same like trail that happened again with the crunchy lifestyle / natural lifestyle / yoga lifestyle into red pill content. That soft life is that same level. If you start watching who is pulling it out and who is talking about the most, you're like, oh. But it's such an interesting level because it does offer you something like, is it the dream for me to not have to work at all and worry about things and sit and watch K-dramas all day and maybe go out to do some Zumba and yoga? Yeah. Have maybe someone cook for me instead of me cooking myself all the nasty foods that I'm like, I'm just going to snack today. Like that level of like comfort of like this ideal that used to be the way, but which is not true at all. Because again, when we have a conversation about like the good old days, when the men worked and the women got to stay at home and women being like, yeah, I'd rather be at home too if everything was equal. But that's not the case. And as you said before, like people who are in the domestic life, who are stay-at-home moms, it's a hard job.
It's a hard job. That's not a soft life.
That's not a soft life.
Have you ever been around toddlers people who are raising toddlers and not getting a break from it because they don't do any wage-earning work outside of the house, they're not living a soft life.
No, and God forbid they have any kind of medical needs, or if they have like school needs, you have to be at all these activities constantly, and you have to show up to do like volunteering there. Oh dear God!
So that is exactly my main beef with Evie, right? They are selling women a lie, a fantasy wherein retreating from public life and just like existing in the domestic is this soft, easy, moneyed fantasy, the kind of life that women should be after. But as you said, one, staying at home is a fucking pain in the sometimes, and it's not soft and glamorous at all. Even like the people who perform trad wife on Instagram, probably like you never see those women cleaning toilets or cleaning baby puke off of their shirt, which is sometimes the reality of staying at home. But in addition to that, not working, not making or managing your own money, not participating in civic and public life is not a recipe for safety and security. It is incredibly risky to the people that do this. The data is incredibly clear that when women stop working, whether they have a kid or they're a caretaker for somebody and they leave the workforce, when they re-enter the workforce, they are going to make a lot less. So if and when they do go back to work, the data is super clear, they're going to be making less, right? And so if you don't work or never work and you just depend on your partner for everything, what happens if your partner passes away? What happens if your partner becomes disabled or sick and they can't work? There are so many ways that this life is incredibly risky and insecure. And the content would have you believe like, oh, this is going to be soft and glamorous and lovely. I wouldn't even have a problem with this kind of content so much if it told women the truth. If it was like, hey, don't work, but also put away a little money for yourself, or don't work, but make sure that you keep an eye on your finances and understand them in case something happens. Like, if they were more realistic and honest about the life that they are selling, I wouldn't even have a big problem with them. But they are not doing that. They're selling a very enticing but dangerous lie.
Yes. And as we've been mentioning throughout, they're doing it in a way that at first you don't realize. Or you're like, oh, yeah, I can relate to this. Yeah. But then you start to think about it. Like, okay, wait, what? What did I just read?
Yeah, this is from that New York Times piece. At first glance, Evie seems nonpartisan, publishing content about daily topics such as award-winning red carpets and styling skinny jeans. But readers who click past hot girl health trends and Adam Brody appreciation posts will find articles that promote positions that are fringe even within conservative circles. Criticisms of no-fault divorce and in vitro fertilization, for example, packaged in a fun and approachable format. A typical Evie headline, Amy from Love is Blind is right to be hesitant about birth control. Also, they're like super sus. They're super sus about birth control. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but yeah. And so this is actually part of a pretty concerning trend. Media spaces that at first glance seem apolitical are actually very political. That is becoming much more common online. Media Matters did an analysis that really showed how right-leaning spaces dominate the online ecosystem with content that appears apolitical at first. The analysis was based on 320 online shows with a right-leaning or left-leaning ideological bent. They found that right-leaning shows dominate the online ecosystem with substantially larger audiences on both politics and news shows and supposedly non-political shows that they determined often platformed ideological content or guests. And here's the kicker. The analysis, which looked entirely at shows with an ideological bent, found over a third self-identify as non-political, even though 72% of those shows were determined to be right-leaning. Instead, these shows describe themselves as comedy, entertainment, sports, or put themselves in supposedly other non-political categories. So basically, these online spaces that are incredibly influential get to be like, oh, we're not political, we're just talking about celebrity gossip and entertainment. But actually, they're incredibly political in specifically 72% of these cases, right-leaning ideological bents.
Yes. And one of the things that really scares me about that in this whole conversation is like Evie going back to the name being like women were wrong and are the source of all evil. Like when I was a kid, I heard that like Bible story and I believed it. And so like, I feel like it's leaning into a lot of stuff many of us internalized growing up of this is the natural way of things.
Right.
This is women stay home, and they're kind of selling like the let's get back to the natural way, and it'll be easier, it'll be nicer for you. When all of this stuff was like built, it was societally made, but they're selling it as like, no, we're going against the natural order, and they're doing it through. Look at this celebrity pop culture story.
Yeah. And that also makes sense as to why they also sell milkmaid style dresses. They also were like, you know what traditional women might want to do? Spend $200 on a like frilly dairy dress that the cut describes as designed in the French countryside. It's said to be inspired by the, quote, hardworking dairymaids of the 17th century Europe, and is handmade with, quote, luxurious organic cotton and 100% feminine energy. So it's like, yeah, it's very much like tied up in this kind of, quote, natural feminine. Honestly, the second that I hear any person or online place say something like, oh, this has like the divine feminine, I'm like, okay, bullshit.
Right.
Like, as soon as I hear that, I'm like, oh, really? Okay.
Of course, in the back of my head, I'm like, so child labor in China is what you're talking about. That's the feminine energy where they get paid 2 cents an hour. Sweet.
Nothing says luxurious feminine energy like unsavory labor practices.
Perfect. That's what I've always wanted. They get that from us anyway. So stay-at-home moms who don't get paid. It's like the same labor. I guess that's the feminine energy.
So in addition to all of this, more problematically, they also have a fertility app. So, you know, I was telling you how they're really not cool with birth control. They have a fertility app called 28. The app is backed by tech billionaire and like mega Trump funder Peter Thiel. I gotta say, like, I simply do not advocate for anyone using apps like this just in general, but especially not one backed by somebody like Thiel. I could do a whole episode. This is where I will talk all day. I'll just say, Google him. He is like he's like if Mr. Burns was a real person and also gay. Like, that's how I would describe him. And
So he's
there's
a
so
Lex
much to say
Luthor?
there.
But Lex Luthor was kinder.
Yeah.
Less, like, he was still better. And like, he had morals. Lex Luthor had morals compared to him.
Yeah, he is not. Not only is he a bad dude, he's also bad in some like ways that if I talked about them here, you would be like, that sounds like something out of a comic book, but it's real. Yeah. So he's one of the funders of their fertility app. They grew interested in the women's fertility app space because many women, Hugo Boom said, that she knew were having trouble getting pregnant. And she said that she wanted to develop a product that would, quote, empower women to understand our bodies. Through some fortuitous networking, they ended up having a meeting with Peter Thiel, and they asked him to invest in a wellness app based on the typical 28-day menstruation cycle. And Thiel was like, is no one else doing this? And it was like, no one else. And he was like, okay, well, sounds like a good idea. A spokesperson for Thiel confirmed that he invested $2 million in the app, and they raised $3.2 million in total. The app pushes a message that hormonal birth control is bad for you. Goodbye toxicity, one advertisement read for the birth control detox supplements it sells through the app. I gotta say, on my tech podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, I work with a producer who has a lot of experience directly writing and reviewing privacy policies for digital health apps. So I asked him to take a look at 28's privacy policy, and it wasn't great. Here's like a rundown of what he told me. He said, the privacy policy doesn't emphasize going out of their way to protect users' privacy. Their section on third-party tracking basically says that third parties will have access to your personal data, but disavows any responsibility for what those third parties do with that personal data, so doesn't fill them with confidence. They put a lot of responsibility on the end user. For example, you can set your browser to refuse all or some browser cookies or alert you when cookies are being sent. He says if they sincerely wanted to respect users' right to privacy rather than capture the value of their data while disavowing any risk, 28 would describe strong, proactive steps that they're taking to protect users' personal data. Instead, this privacy policy is all about mitigating their risk by shifting it onto unspecified third parties and by shifting it onto the user themselves. So especially in a climate where people are being criminalized for information like this, I would not recommend anybody trust any of their sensitive, intimate data to an app without a very robust privacy policy in place. I especially would not recommend that anybody give that data to somebody that's connected to Peter Thiel, who is connected to Donald Trump. Like, that is just not something I would recommend.
No. Sminty signs off on that. So that's concerning. We've got a lot of concerning things we've gone over. But just to bring the point home, Bridget, what is the big deal with Evie and why is it so problematic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very problematic because, listen, there is nothing wrong with like online content that speaks to all different kinds of women, all different kinds of women's experiences and perspectives. To me, the whole point of being a feminist is that it allows for women to choose paths and perspectives that work for them, right? However, Evie, I find problematic because it is designed to sell that lie I was talking about earlier, that lie that makes women not being in the public and civic sphere look glossy and glamorous, which isn't just wrong, it can be dangerous, it can be hurtful. And even though that is dangerous, it's also very enticing, I can understand why that's appealing, especially in a climate right now where everything is confusing, everything is chaotic. I can understand the desire for women to be like, I just want my soft life at home. From that piece, quote, even critics of Evie acknowledge the appeal of its messaging. It's a perfectly pretty gateway drug to ideologies which exist to protect the privileged and further disenfranchise the marginalized. That's from Sarah Peterson, the author of the book Momfluenced. And I would say something that makes it even more concerning to me is that when something is happening and it's happening in a space that has sort of been relegated to women, there's not really a lot of eyes on it. There's an automatic assumption that it's like just a fluffy, poppy space, and what happens there doesn't really matter to anybody or is not of any consequence to anybody. And so I think that because the kind of people who care about extremism and media and all of that might not be looking at a space like Evie online too hard, precisely because it speaks to women. That means that Evie can advocate for positions that even conservatives would say are extreme and not really have a lot of people pushing back, right? And so I think it's a really, really effective way of potentially radicalizing women into a pretty extreme ideology. So we absolutely need to be paying attention to what is happening in these online spaces. And probably my biggest personal beef is that she's lying to us. She is lying to women. She has a very belittling attitude about women, and that comes through so clearly in this piece. So the founder that I've been talking about, Brittany Hugoboom, she runs a media and tech company that she says gets 500,000 eyeballs across social media, while also telling you, other women, that, we don't have the aptitude to do exactly what it is that she is doing successfully and making money from. When asked about women running businesses in the piece, she said, quote, I think when most women try to do that, they fail. Then they feel upset about it when it's not really in their nature. This is how she feels about women. And I know that to be a lie. The reason why I know it to be a lie is because she's doing it. So she knows it's a lie too. She is lying to you to make a buck. And that is ultimately my big beef with this publication.
I think that the conversation is always kind of funny. It's that whole level of when marginalized communities have to compete with each other. And so they're gonna do everything they can to get out their competition instead of realizing that the supremacy of men and white men are the actual competition. And she's like, yeah, don't do this because you're not going to be as good as I am, obviously, because I'm
Women
white.
Can't run a business.
I'm white, I'm Christian, and I got a Christian husband. He knows. But it's really fascinating because again, when we had that conversation about women in magazines, the influence of magazines is deep,
Mm-hmm.
and it runs for years and years and years and years. When we talk about The Good Housewife, we talked about Southern Living, that those are core memories for me, specifically about my mother. And then from my mother's generation, that to them was the perfect life. So kind of, again, that cyclical point of being of like, we need to go back to the Southern living standard of housekeeping, which means that women stay home and that is their full achievement, is how they maintain their home. And it's interesting because Evie is kind of bringing that back and understanding how to indoctrinate young women, just like we talked about young men in podcasts. This is one of those forms of understanding that, okay, in order to radicalize young women, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this in the way of like reminding them of the good old days that they don't know anything about. They have a fantasy of whether it's watching Little House on the Prairie or hearing about Little House on the Prairie, whatever, whatnot. And we're going to use that to tell them they're going to fail. So why not try it this way?
And you could see why that would be a really compelling story. Like
enticing.
Again, like I have to be, as somebody who a lot of my, I mean, I'm not a trad wife, but I have a lot of trad wife interests and hobbies. Like I like preserving things. I like cooking from scratch. I like gardening. I like all of that. Like I can understand, like, I just really see the ways that, especially right now, we are selling women this very enticing lie that if they actually buy that, it is incredibly dangerous. Like there was a whole trend of like real trad wives, women who really like left the working world and got married and had kids, and then like, you know, really relied on their spouse for everything, talking about how damaging it was for them and their children. Like there are real stakes when women do this. And so there's nothing wrong with being a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home parent, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But we should not be glamorizing that without also telling the truth about the reality of what that looks like and the ways that can put you at risk and what you should be doing to mitigate those risks.
Right. Especially when we know right now lawmakers are really trying to turn back that clock in that level of taking rights away from women, making sure they can't vote, taking their financial abilities as well.
Yeah.
Like we're seeing that is happening right now as they're trying to introduce this into Senate to in order to go back to that, in order to take away rights from women. And women are like, okay, cool. Some women, not obvious, like, but like, they're like, this could be a soft life, yeah?
I mean, we have to talk about it. I have seen this, like, threads of this attitude picking up steam online with like younger and younger women. There's that whole trend of like young girls wearing shirts that are like, oh, too pretty to work and things like that. Like that might seem cute, but really, like really take a step back and think like, what is it that we're advocating for? Are we advocating for systems that are actually going to protect, like put us at risk or protect us? Like, I think that we rightly talk a lot about the radicalization of men and boys. We should also be talking about the radicalization of women and girls through online content because, yeah, I just think that we're setting up a generation of women and girls to really put themselves at risk and maybe not even realize the ways in which they're doing that.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something Samantha and I have been talking about a lot lately. So as always, Bridget, every time you come on, we're like, we have a million other things we need to talk about. So thank you so much for taking the time and for bringing these topics to us. We really appreciate it. Where can the good listeners find you?
You can listen to my podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet. New season is dropping on May 14th, so please check it out. Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Bridget Marie in DC.
Yes. And can't wait to do this again. Listeners, go check Bridget out on the podcast. Excited for the new season on social media or on other episodes of Stuff I've Never Told You. And yes, if you would like to contact us, you can. You can email us at hello@stuffInevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Mom Stuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.